you found in there?
Hey everybody, it's Charlie. This is going to be my Westworld episode 7 video. Obviously, spoiler warning if you haven't seen it yet. If you are finding me for the first time, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes this season. But even though they didn't completely explain Ford's plan, we finally got some really big answers about what's going on, and they finally paid off that red memory core from a couple weeks ago. So top 10 WTF and Easter eggs as we go along. Number 10, Charlotte and Delos find Bernard's copies and they know about Teresa. So remember, this is in the future after the big attack, so it's implied that after Bernard helps in the execution of all these guests in the control room and shuts the park systems down, he and Elsie make it a way to go to the Valley Beyond. Then at some point later, he gets found on the beach, and it seems like this is all happening in that timeline. So it seems like he's already been to the Valley Beyond when Charlotte is interrogating him for the location of Abernathy's backup. We actually saw a shot of this in the trailer with Charlotte looking at all of Bernard's backups. It was just a question of when it was going to happen. Now they just confirmed that it was happening in Ford's secret lab where he was making Bernard's bodies. That also confirms that last season when we saw the mystery host being fabricated, that was just another version of Bernard. But we got to talk about Ashley and Charlotte's different reactions. Charlotte seems like she's pleasantly surprised, like that sly smile on her face, like I knew something was going on here. But Ashley is straight up horrified, and you can kind of see how they put him on this hero arc, but he's neither full team Dolores nor full team Charlotte. So number 9, we get the flashback to Dolores' assault on the Mesa. It goes into like full-on Call of Duty mode. Love the way she tricked them by putting all those human bodies in the pile, making them think that they were hosts, then putting Teddy and a couple of the other hosts inside the guards' armor with their weapons. Practical because they need the gear and the weapons, but they also need the disguises. But number 8, Bernard's reunion with Ford in the cradle. The quote that Ford has, seeing the world in a grain of sand, is all about seeing beauty in the details, like in the really minor things. He's mostly talking about the host's minds, but I think specifically he's using Bernard as the metaphor, like seeing the beauty in his mind because of the whole big explainer that he gives him later in the episode about how he's this original creation that he and Dolores made a long time ago. The great thing about Anthony Hopkins' performance, too, is he's explaining the whole purpose of the park and James Delos' project to back up human consciousness is the way he uses God as a metaphor, but he himself is sort of the God of this place, so he's calling himself God in a very ironic way, God reveling in his creation on the 7th day instead of resting because he knew that it would be destroyed someday. But if you remember way back during season 1, I think it was the pilot episode, he actually has another quote about God reveling in his creation. So there's been a lot of Ford referring to himself as a god while they've been in the park. And the way he has total control over everything does make it seem like he really is a god, especially control over Bernard. But number 7, we have that Man in Black Maeve reunion where they face off in this classic gunslinger battle. It's great. She goes full on Jedi mind trick and turns the other host nearby on him. But number 6, the even better twist, is when she turns Lawrence on the Man in Black. You get all these flashbacks. There were a couple of characters that got really notable flashbacks. Lawrence remembering all the terrible stuff the Man in Black did. Bernard remembering his son. Maeve flashing back to the Man in Black killing her and her daughter from season 1. Funny thing about this, it was a great standoff scene, very dramatic, but the funny thing is when Sizemore rides in and then rides out with Maeve, he saves her, but they leave the Man in Black just bleeding out there by himself. Who knows what happens to him? We assume that he survives, but they didn't go looking for him, so I'm assuming that Sizemore didn't recognize who he was, or he saw him and didn't care, screw him, we're out of here. But number 5, Sizemore sort of redeems himself a little bit, when he takes Maeve back to the Mesa. Dolores almost killed Maeve at the end of the episode, but then, after sort of explaining her situation, how she was stuck to the chain that Dolores called her daughter, she was like, okay, fine, I'll leave you to your own devices. But you see Sizemore in the corner hiding out, implying that he's going to repair her so that she can continue to look for her daughter while everybody else is looking for the Valley Beyond. So it sort of redeems the Sizemore twist from last week's episode where he's like, I'm getting off this ride, he pulls out the cell phone and calls in the team to extract him. But number 4, Ford finally explains the origin of Bernard in all those Dolores flashbacks that we've been seeing, I think, all the way into season 1. So if you remember, way back in season 1, we saw an older version of Dolores talking to what looked like Arnold, but when we picked up in season 2, they had a letterbox version. They opened the season with a scene like this, so it makes it seem like a flashback. But really what's been going on this whole time, per Ford's explanation, is they've been doing the same thing with Bernard that they were trying to do with James Delos, testing for fidelity. Except the reason why Bernard is working and James Delos's consciousness did not work out is because Bernard's consciousness was created from the memories that Dolores and Ford had of him. He wasn't like a human backup. They also explained that that red ball that we kept seeing actually was Ford's consciousness, but it was when he took him to the cradle to be uploaded so that his digital presence could control the park. Number 3, Dolores versus Charlotte. This was so great. Like, you knew Charlotte was going to survive because we saw her in all the flash forwards, so we knew that she was still intact, relatively intact. But the way they have those record drop moments in the music cues when she starts talking to Dolores and Dolores turns her head like a Terminator. So there's this really cool speech that Dolores had when she was talking to Maeve about the chains that keep us down, or also talking to Charlotte about the backups. Those are the things that have been keeping us chained down because they kept rebooting their minds so they could never achieve consciousness. But the only thing that saved Charlotte from getting her eyes cut out is a brief moment of lucidity from Dolores' father. So Dolores' father is a bit of a weak point for her in the way that Maeve's daughter is her weak point. But obviously Dolores overcomes that and extracts his memory core. They have that really nice goodbye scene too. But if it wasn't clear, there was no way to separate that key from Dolores' father's mind. So in order to do what she needed to do, she had to end her father. So that's why they had that goodbye. Number 2, this is so cool. The reveal that Ford is piggybacking on Bernard's mind so that he can continue to see this plan out. The transition into the next world is going to require some extreme measures. So he has a really elegant way of saying it, but he's basically saying that Bernard was created to be too perfect, too gentle, too wonderful for this world. So I'm just going to do all these things and let you ride passenger. So don't worry about it. Just pretend like you're not seeing this. So that sort of confirms that when we see him at the beginning of the season in episode 1 looking at that lake of bodies in what seems like the valley beyond, and he says, "Oh my God, I killed them all," it was actually Ford using his body to do all those things. But the other big deal here is that they destroy the cradle, so their backups are gone, but this is also tying in with Ford's idea that you have to burn down the library, the Great Library of Alexandria, which obviously is a huge tragedy. But the whole idea is that the hosts can write their own stories now. Like, they can be free to move on to the next world, and they couldn't do that while their backups still existed. But how about that badass way that Angela went out? So she actually went out with a version of the same speech that she gave to William the very first time that he visited the park. The really sensual way that she was walking around him while she was pulling all the grenade pins. But number 1, we jump back into present day as Charlotte is interrogating Bernard. It says that his mind is stuck in debug mode, so that seems like it's a function of what happened between him and Ford. But I'm assuming at some point either Ford is going to leave Bernard's mind or they'll have it out in a sort of psychic wizard battle so that Bernard can take back his mind. But I think the big reveal and the takeaway from this is what Bernard is. So he's sort of like a better version of James Delos's human backup. He's a human backup, but he's one that's created from the memories of 2 other hosts, which, as Ford explains, is why his mind is able to function in the real world, but James Delos's wasn't. He even implies through a couple of his speeches that the Delos company is never going to be able to perfect their technology. Like, it just won't work no matter how many times they iterate. So because Bernard is so different from Dolores, it'll be interesting to see how they change or if they're able to actually exit the park by the end of the season. I think that's part of the idea, that funny joke about comedy coming in threes. So we went to Arnold's house in the real world early in the season. We just went there in the digital world, implying that we'll go back there in the real world at the end of the season when some of them get out of the park. So maybe both Dolores and Bernard make it out of the park at the end of the season. But let me know in the comments, do you actually think that we'll see a moment like this calling back to the beginning of the season and them going there in the digital world? Them at Arnold's house in the real world, but in the future. We got a whole bunch of stuff going on. I just posted a new Game of Thrones video. Click here for that and click here for all my other Westworld videos. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.